Welcome to Planet 412. I'm your host, Matt Emsch. We're going to be doing different states and the creatures associated with them. Today, it just so happens to be the state of Maryland. Recognized as the birthplace of religious freedom in the New World, is the ninth smallest state in the Union at 68 square miles. It's home to something called the Snallygaster. As early as the 1700s, Maryland residents claimed a giant reptilian bird soared through the skies above the state. The ravenous creature would swoop down and pluck pets, game, livestock, and sometimes children from the ground, disappearing with them into the skies. Eyewitness descriptions of the Snallygaster sound like that of a pterosaur or pterodactyl, an enormous flying monster with a wingspan of 25 to 30 feet, bigger than some planes. A long beak and leathery skin that looks like a reptile. However, the Snallygaster also has tentacles, talons of steel, and carries with it the pungent scent of death. Reports of the Snallygaster in Maryland continued until the 1930s, when they became sporadic, appearing again in 1948 and 1973. A local man named James Harding was the first to lay claim to a Snallygaster sighting, describing the monster as having one eye in the center of its forehead. The next monster up on the list, you may have heard of this one, the Goatman. Kentucky has its own legend of a Goatman, as does Texas and Missouri. So does Maryland, Prince George's County, Maryland. So close to the nation's capital of Washington, D.C., residents can smell the corruption, is home of a half-man, half-goat monster straight out of a horror movie. Reports of an axe-wielding, satyr-like creature chasing automobiles near Beltsville, Maryland, stretched through the years. Either the entity was a goat farmer seeking revenge on teenagers who killed his livestock, a monster created by the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center, or is a natural monster native to the area. The Modern Farmer article quotes University of Maryland professor Dr. Barry Pearson, who said Goatman sightings began in the 1950s and became frantically popular in the 1970s. A Washington Post story in 1971 about the death of a pet included quotes from the locals blaming the Goatman. The next monster on the list comes from Chesapeake Bay, the largest enclosed body of water attached to an ocean and fed by rivers in the United States. It stretches from southern Virginia to northern Maryland. It's also home to Chessie. This sea monster is described as a dark, snake-like creature about 30 feet long that seems to simply watch people working or playing in the bay. Although seen for decades, coming in 1982, a family videotaped Chessie from Kent Island, Maryland. The tape shows an animal fitting Chessie's description. Same shape, same length. Although most sightings of this creature occurred in the 1970s and 1980s, they continued today. The next one on the list, you may have heard before, the Sykesville monster. Bigfoot was damn popular in the United States in the 1970s. Missouri's Momo, Louisiana's Honey Island Swamp Monster, Arkansas's Fouke Monster, all in the 1970s. Maryland was no exception. And the area around Sykesville, northwest of Baltimore, was stalked by a Bigfoot-like creature with encounters so terrifying it was hunted by police, a game warden, zoo officials, and professional paranormal investigators. According to the Carroll County Times, police took a plaster cast of a footprint that was 13 inches long and 7 inches wide. Author and researcher Lon Strickler, who posts his work at phantomsandmonsters.com, became interested in cryptozoology on a May morning in 1981 when he saw the Sykesville monster. Strickler was fly fishing in the Patapsco River near Sykesville when he noticed a dog had wandered the banks. The dog simply sniffed the weeds near the water, and Strickler ignored it until the dog began to bark and growl. Strickler looked up and saw a hair-covered, bipedal creature about 8 feet tall. Whoa, standing in the thicket. Strickler froze and observed the monster. The monster made a ticking sound and smelled like urine. As Strickler moved to get a better look at the creature, it just walked away. Strickler returned to his vehicle, drove into town, and called police. Within the hour, the area was filled with people hunting for the creature, and they never found it. Next up is the creature that I have personal experience with. Among the many reports of various hairy wild men reported throughout the world, some of the strangest are those that seem to point to some sort of dogman or werewolf-type beast. Such stories and lore are plentiful from a range of disparate locations. One place that has long had its lore and strange sightings of a werewolf-like creature is that U.S. state of Maryland, where a half-man, half-wolf apparition is said to roam. Tales of some sort of hairy bipedal wolf man stalking the lands of Maryland go back to the times of the first Pennsylvania Dutch settlers to the area in the 18th century, who often called the beast the Hexen wolf and believed that it hunted their livestock. It was often linked to another creature of local lore called the gaster. You already heard me speak of it. Said to be a flying reptile that drinks blood, and indeed the wolfman and snallygaster were said to be mortal enemies. So far it sounds like pure folklore and fantasy, but that would change in 1944 when it was reported that a hulking, hairy creature with canine features and a bushy tail was seen in the forest of West Middleton, Frederick County, and residents of the area frequently complained of hearing shrill howls in the night and of finding strange footprints on their property. However, the creature would go on to fully propel into the public consciousness when a compelling report hit the news in 1965, which seems to have made the Maryland Wolfman more real. In November of 1965, a local man by the name of John Becker called a local newspaper and claimed to have heard a strange noise in the backyard of his rural property. Thinking it was some wild animal, he went out to investigate, and what he found was far stranger than anything he had ever expected to see out there in the murky dark. It was getting dark, and he had started back to the house when he saw something move toward him. It was as big as a bear, a bushy tail, and growled like a wolf or a dog in anger. As it got closer, it stood up on its hind legs and attacked him. Becker fought the creature until it ran into the woods, leaving him, his wife, and children in horror. Deciding to remain anonymous under the alias John Becker, he filed a report with the local state police, telling of an attack by a mysterious monster that he called a dueo. It is all certainly pretty sensational, and it was met with much skepticism at that time, especially considering police who went out to the property where Becker supposedly lived, and they found nothing, not even the rural road that Becker claimed to live on, leading them to think it was a prank. However, as soon as it hit the news, other people began reporting having come across the exact same thing prowling about in the shadows. A witness in Jefferson claimed to have seen a dog-shaped animal about the size of a calf marauding, and several hunters saw the same thing too. One hunter would say that his own experience, "My dog started chasing something and I saw it was black, but I didn't think too much of it, believing it was a dog, maybe even a bear. However, after reading the newspaper article, I'm not too sure it wasn't a dueo. It trotted something like a horse." In the summer of the following year, there was a remarkable report from the rugged area of Damrell State Park, where a camper claimed to have witnessed a shaggy, two-legged creature the size of a deer that had a triangle-shaped head with pointed ears and chin. which issued a horrific scream before running off into the night. Another report given to the site Phantoms and Monsters also seems to have come from around the same time, from a witness who says that he was around 11 years old at the time. He says that at the time he had been staying with his grandmother on her rural property, and one evening he had gone out into the pitch black outside to use the nearby outhouse. He didn't bring a flashlight because he knew the way well, and the moon was bright that night. And he says of what happened next, I made it down to the outhouse and don't even remember hearing the usual night noises like crickets, frogs, or owls. It seemed almost too quiet. I was a sharp and smart kid with a great imagination, but not enough to make up this story. I felt an uncanny sensation of being watched, and I started to get scared. Feeling of dread overwhelmed me. I left the outhouse, peeked outside first, and for some reason, I wanted to run back to the house, getting to safety as quickly as possible. I tired quickly and began walking the last few hundred feet to the porch of the house. Something told me to look back where I had been. To this day, I wish I hadn't. What I saw was an impossible sight. This animal stepping through the backyard of Grandma's property, just past the garden about 10 feet past the outhouse. It was this upright, furry creature with a dog-wolf head. I have owned German Shepherds from the age of 7, so the head was almost similar to the ears and snoot of a German Shepherd dog. I stopped dead in my tracks, not believing my eyes because it was impossible. It had arms that had claw-like hands that hung out in front of it. As it turned its head and looked right at me, the eyes looked yellow and super reflective. Chills shot up my spine as it quickly walked on two legs that looked like real dog legs, bending backwards, traveling left to right past her garden, into the old gravel lane, then across into the thicket of the woods, where it disappeared. I heard the rustling through the weeds. It may have initially traveled from the usually full cow pasture that was up an incline, past the spring, and up to the cow pasture that was behind Grandma's house. I shudder to think it was hiding behind the outhouse I was in, but that is a distinct possibility as well. In every case, the Dwayyo has always been described as looking like a wolf or an Irish wolfhound on its hind legs. Others claim that they had heard the beast at night, with one local claiming that it cried like a baby and then screamed like a woman for months. You hear Sasquatch do that as well, unless it's always been dogmen doing that. Still, other reports were a little more bizarre, such as one local who called police to tell them that she had actually captured the wolf man in her basement. Yet when the police arrived, there was no sign of it. So many reports were coming in that locals even organized a Dwayyo hunt, but almost no one showed up, so it was canceled. Reports would mostly then fall off, but they did occur sporadically. In 1976, there was another alleged sighting that occurred in Frederick County near Thurmont, between Cunningham Falls State Park and Catoctin Mountain National Park. On this evening, two men were driving down a dark private road through the woods when their headlights caught something they would never forget. The report was featured in the book The Michigan Dogman, Werewolves and Other Unknown Canines Across the USA, in which the witness says it was at least 6 feet tall but inclined forward since it was moving quickly. Its head was fairly large and similar to the profile of a wolf. The body was covered in brown and brindle-colored fur, but the lower half had a striped pattern of noticeable darker and lighter banding. The forelegs or arms were slimmer and held out in front as it moved. The back legs were very muscled and thick, similar to perhaps a kangaroo. This was not a hominid-type creature. It did not have the characteristics of an ape. It was much more similar to a wolf or ferocious dog. However, it was definitely moving upright and appeared to be adapted for that of mobility. In 1978, two park rangers would report seeing a large, canine-looking beast running along on two legs. And in as recently as 2009, a woman claimed that a huge dog-like animal on two legs had chased her car as she was driving on Coxsey Brown Road near Myersville, Maryland. She would claim that it had actually leapt and grabbed at her vehicle before she was able to outrun it, and it gave up to lope off into the night. We are left to wonder what this creature could possibly be. It is some sort of Bigfoot, a real werewolf, some sort of interdimensional being, or merely lore and legend. Whatever the case may be, the Dueo has remained firmly lodged within the lore of rural Maryland, and a curious case indeed. Before I finish, I wanted to say a nice shout out to Audacious Amber. She asked me specifically to talk about Maryland, so this one's for you, Amber.